Hi everyone, Heather here with astrologywithheather.com, and I am back with another special video. And this is the next video in my series with Raphael from Reydiant Reality. Hi, Raphael. And today we're going to be discussing the Chariot card in the Major Arcana. And so we've been going through and doing every single card in the Major Arcana and talking about the astrological associations with the cards and learning a whole lot in the process. And I hope you guys have been learning a lot as well. And so if you want to follow the entire series, which we're about not even halfway through yet, so there's still a ways to go, you're going to want to subscribe to my channel and Raphael's channel, which I highly recommend that you do because his channel is jam-packed with really interesting information. He does weekly and monthly forecasts that are so weirdly accurate, like general forecasts for Virgo that are like describing my life. It's, it's super freaky. So he's very good at what he does. So thank you so much for doing this with me, Raphael.
Wow, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for working on this project with me. Like, I'm super chuffed. As the same as well, I have to say your content is brilliant. I love the recent video that you put out about the Mars retrograde coming up. Was super informative and very helpful for on a personal level. So very chuffed and loving this project. I'm really learning a lot about the astrology side of things, because obviously I know the tarot, so just learning like everything that you bring to it with the astrology is great. It's really deepening my own understanding of things that I already know and things that I'm learning. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you too. And I'm definitely learning a lot, even about astrology through this, because it helps me to kind of think about things from a different perspective. But definitely with tarot, I've been kind of dabbling and just kind of playing around with my tarot decks for years now, but now I feel like I actually understand things way better. And things that I wouldn't even think of that would be connected to the symbolism. And it really does add like a lot of layers of information that I didn't have before. So I can actually pull some cards for myself and understand what it actually is telling me instead of saying, what the heck is this?
Oh, that's brilliant. Awesome. So today we are going straight in with the Chariot card. So again, I mean, as they all are, same with astrology, right? Every single card is packed full of symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things with tarot you'll find as well, like every single card, especially the major arcana cards, they have so many different patterns, ideas, metaphors, allegories condensed into one sort of picture. So when we see the Chariot card, this is the card that follows the Lovers and comes just before the Strength card. So that in itself is kind of really interesting. Now, we visited some of the themes that you'll see in this card before, which is really kind of interesting and kind of exciting. So the astrological association for this card is Cancer, believe it or not. Now, when you look at it from just like as an overt sort of symbol, you might not necessarily kind of pick that out, because if you look at him, he looks quite sort of, you know, he's not like the soft sort of nurturing stuff that you usually associate with Cancer.
Yeah.
So what I say to people with this card is, if you consider then that he's like the exoskeleton. So when you think about Cancer energy, you think about the crab, right? So the High Priestess would be the inner watery sort of world, and the Chariot would be how they, you know, it would be the exoskeleton. It's where that Cancerian energy shows up in the outer world. And if you can see some of the, so you've got on the High Priestess card, you've got the two pillars, black and white. And then here on the Chariot card, you've got the two Sphinxes. So that's kind of a nod to say that it's a very similar energy, only whereas with the High Priestess, we were talking all about the inner world, the intuition, the psychic impressions and psychic world. Whereas in this card, we visit all of the external factors of how that shows up in our world. And when you look at him, he looks very triumphant. Right, so there's this idea, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But if you look at, so to get into, like you said about the symbolism, this is where we're going to start to kind of see where the links to Cancer come in. So if you look at his shoulders, I don't know if you can see it very well there are moons either side.
Oh, yeah.
So those represent, right, the lunar part of it. And then if you look down here, what the white Sphinx, you can see it has kind of boobs, right?
Yeah. So that's
Another nod to the Cancerian energy, you know, of the, because Cancer rules the breasts and the chest. So it kind of it's just that hit to kind of say to you, like, the symbolism is there, you just kind of have to look for it.
Yeah, and that makes sense, astrologically, because a lot of people don't realize that Cancer is a cardinal sign. And so Cancer is about action. It's about action born out of emotion or intuition, being led or guided by something internal versus external. And so that's a very Cancerian thing. And all of the cardinal signs are about action and initiation in one way or another. The element determines where that initiation is coming from or what's driving it.
Wow, that's so cool. Like, yeah, that's brilliant. And it makes total sense, because this is the other thing as well with this card. It represents victory, it represents success, it represents worldly success. But these are things that are only approached once you've applied the lessons that the High Priestess has brought you. And she's all about that intuition, those impressions, those feelings, or those, sometimes you get that kind of nudge and you're like, well, I don't really know why I'm doing this, but I'm going to do it because it feels like what I should be doing.
Yeah.
Right? And it leads you to a victory or a success of some sort. It's really interesting that we're actually doing this on the Cancer eclipse as well.
Yeah, that's so weird. Yeah, that's like happening right now.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So the other thing with the Sphinxes as well, these represent the two, so just like in the Lovers, we saw the two hemispheres of the brain, whereas with the Sphinxes here, this is talking about controlling the light and the dark side of yourself. So when you think about Cancerian energy, it is very much about that internal world, and you're balancing those sort of light and shadow energies. So when you see this card, one thing that I always draw people to as well, although it's a chariot and you can see the Sphinxes there, there's no reins. So this kind of suggests that you're using just your inner willpower, just your inner focus, your inner emotions, your inner energy, really, to steer those two very, quite frankly, volatile energies in the direction that you want them to go. And that's kind of a nod to the strength that you find in the inner world of Cancer.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So it's not like you're overtly doing anything. You're like guiding something. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Wow. Okay. I never really thought about the chariot being Cancerian until I read over your write-up about it, but it does make sense to me. And Cancer, though, the one thing I want to ask you about is that Cancer, it is an initiatory sign. It's a cardinal sign, but Cancer tends to not go at things head first, and the chariot kind of looks like it's like head first, like jumping at something or running towards something, whereas Cancer is a crab, right? And so the crab tends to walk like side to side, back to front. It goes all over the place. Does that tie in with the symbolism of the chariot? Because Cancer tends to approach things kind of sideways, not directly.
Absolutely. So, and the interesting thing about that, I would say, maybe not necessarily in terms of the direction that the chariot moves, but certainly in terms of, because one of the things that people forget about charioteers, they weren't just people that drove, funky looking chariots, they were warriors. So there's this whole sort of other layer or hidden aspect to the character that's kind of drawing, that's driving the chariot, so to speak. It's a really interesting point that you make, though, very much so, because they really can only go forward, right?
Yeah.
So, and the cardinal thing that you mentioned, absolutely perfect. So when you look at the crown, that is a nod to the fact that it's a cardinal sign. Okay. So it's, do you know what I mean? It's like all kind of forward thinking and all kind of almost like, in a sense, what's the word? I want to say regal, but I think that's actually the wrong word that I'll be using. Although you can kind of call Cancer a regal sign, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Not necessarily regal, but maybe more traditional, or like not traditional. I don't know how to describe it. Like matriarchal almost. Like that would be kind of a Cancerian energy versus Leo, which is more like patriarchal and kingly. That feels more regal to me. When you think regal, you think, Leo, obviously, but Cancer would be like the matriarch, and Cancer is ruled by the moon, and the moon is the matriarch. So that makes a lot of sense. And also the dark and light phases of the moon with that black and white Sphinx.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, obviously the different sides of self. And I think that's where because if you look at him, he's wearing quite a lot of armor. as well, which is another nod to that kind of tough outer exterior to kind of get through things. What I've got here as well is, you know, like the stone square that he sat on. So this chariot here is very similar to what you would see the emperor sat on. So that kind of is a nod to the idea of home. And what he's done is taken kind of that piece of home along with him.
Which is a very crab thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so there's that like physical kind of structure and that physical component, the physical comfort that's being taken along with the chariot. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, for sure. And with this as well, it's very much about triumphing over the outer world, but by using the inner faculties. So sometimes when you see this card in a reading, it can be that somebody has passed a test, like they've had to use a lot of their own sort of inner resources to pass. I've seen this represent anything from a driving test through to like a university degree. It just depends obviously on the cards that come up with it. And it will show you as well, sometimes what you're conquering are those two aspects of self, right? The sphinxes. This is where you're going through that battle with yourself to say, right, okay, in order to do this, I'm going to have to control A, B, and C within myself.
Yeah, and that's something that is definitely a Cancerian lesson for sure, because Cancers, they tend to be very driven and ruled by their emotions. And if they don't learn how to channel that into something or to not be like all over the place with it, then it can be a little bit chaotic. And also Cancers are surprisingly tough. Like people think about Cancers as being sensitive and like really touchy and all of these things. Not necessarily. Like they are very tough and they will stand up for what they believe in. They'll stand up for what they care for and what they feel for. And so they do have that sort of tough exterior, that armor, but they only bring it out under certain circumstances. And so if something that they really value internally, like on that subjective level, or if someone or something that they have an emotional tie to is being hurt or attacked in some way, that's when you'll see the claws come out with Cancer. That's when you'll see them charging forward. It's something that they value has to be at risk though, in order for them to really bring that out, but they will bring it out, and they're one track minded as soon as that type of situation occurs.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think that's kind of where the protective element of Cancer comes in as well.
Yeah. I mean, they're self-protective to a certain extent, but they mostly are protective of the people and the things that they have emotional attachments to, that they care about. And so like their family members would be a really good example of that, right? Cancer will stick up for their family or their friends that feel like family, the people that they have emotional ties to. They might not necessarily stick up for themselves in the same way. They might avoid conflict if it's like something directed at them. But if their like mother is being attacked, their claws will come out and they will defend their mother like to the death. And so not necessarily every single Cancer will want to defend their mother specifically, but it's the people that they really care about and they really value.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I remember reading as well what you were saying there about maybe not necessarily defending themselves. If they need to, they'll snap like a limb off. They're known to like snap a limb off so that they can scurry away.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not dealing with that. I'm straight up out. And yeah, very true as well. Like, because I often say to people when I'm doing my readings, if there's a lot of Cancerian energy like present, I'll say to them, you know, if you ever see a parent defending their kid, that's Cancerian energy to the extreme, and you will definitely lose that one. So you know, let them do what they gotta do.
Yeah, you don't want to get in the way of a Cancer that's like on the defense, that's like in attack mode. Like you definitely won't win. There's no rational, logical approach to it. It is all pure emotion, and there's nothing that's going to stop that.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, that's quite an interesting point, because when you think about like human beings, when they're under like extreme stress and stuff, and you speak to people that have done these amazing things, and they're like, I don't know, I just felt ... And then they're able to, you know, like a pregnant mother lifts a car off of her 2-year-old, and you know, you hear about these crazy things and you're like, wow, like that's amazing.
Wow, yeah. And that, I mean, that feels to me like the chariot energy, because it's kind of like once you're in that mode, you're unstoppable, but you have to get in that mode. It has to be something that you care about so much that you're willing to die for it.
Absolutely. And if it's channeled, and I think maybe that's where the idea of the chariot comes in. So it doesn't necessarily mirror the symbolism of the crab going sideways, but when it's in for something and it's totally
Okay,
on
yeah.
point, then it's kind of almost like single-minded, you know, in that cardinal energy kind of way, which is kind of cool. There was a question I wanted to ask you about that. It's kind of, I mean, we've kind of answered it, but how does Cancer sort of demonstrate its strength?
Cancer demonstrates its strength through, well, first off, that emotional strength, obviously, but Cancer is strongest in its like receptivity and its ability to kind of be that container to hold other people and to hold emotion. That chariot, right? So they're going to hold other people through their problems, their struggles. They're going to kind of help somebody push through. So it's more of a receptive energy because it's a feminine sign, and it's like a very receptive energy because it's like that lunar feminine sign, right? And so they are the support system. They're the container for other people and to help other people to thrive and to support people on that emotional level. That's where their strength really lies. And so you always want a Cancer on your side. If you're going through like a really hard time, like that Cancer person is going to stick up for you. They're going to defend you. They're going to hold you through it, and they're going to support you so you can push through, and you can be that chariot, right? You're the driver, but like the container is like the Cancer.
Yeah, I love that. Brilliant. Yeah, and it totally fits. I love that. I love that a lot. So that kind of leads me perfectly onto my next question. A lot of people might think I'm kind of biased for this because I have a moon sign of Cancer. So maybe that's why I say this. But for me personally, just from what I know about the signs, I see Cancer as the most psychic of the signs. Would you agree that that was right, or maybe not?
It depends on your definition of psychic. I think we talked about this a little bit with the
I think
Empress.
so. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I have a Cancer moon too. You're very empathic and very easily able to pick up on things. And I think Cancer has a much easier time differentiating between intuition and their own emotions and what they're picking up on versus Pisces, which I think picks up on more. And there's more depth to it, but it's like all over the place. Like they're picking up on anything and everything, and it's very hard to pin down what the heck they're feeling and what that even means. And
Mm.
so it can be very vague, very loose, very scattered, and very hard to do something with. And also, when you think about Pisces, that's like a mutable water sign. So it's not very focused. It's not about doing anything with that information. Whereas Cancer can take that. They know where it's coming from. They know what it's about, and then they can actually do something with it. Yeah, that chariot energy. So I would say in a practical sense, Cancer is maybe not necessarily more psychic, but they can use it better.
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think maybe like the most psychic of signs was probably the wrong way to phrase the question, but it makes total sense. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So which attributes would you say Cancerians, if they're maybe unconscious of themselves or maybe the depths of themselves, what attributes would you say they kind of need to work on?
They need to work on they need to work
We
on
love you, by the way. All Cancerians watching this. No hate, no shade.
being a little bit more grounded and seeing things more objectively, because they're very subjective. So whatever it is that they're feeling in that moment, that's their truth, and that's completely fine. Their feelings are valid, right? Everyone's feelings are valid, but they have a hard time seeing things objectively and approaching things rationally, logically, that type of thing. And so that can get them in trouble, and they can be a little moody and a little all over the place. And so if they feel like they want something and it feels right to them and their emotions are really behind it, they're going to be in it. They're going to do it regardless of whether or not it makes sense, like on this rational, logical level. And that can get them in trouble. And also, yeah, they have that armor, but they are kind of sensitive, and they are kind of, touchy. And so sometimes they take things very personally that are not necessarily about them. And that's where that objectivity comes into play as well. So I would say their biggest weakness is feeling too much and relying too much on their emotions, and not being able to step aside from that.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. It's so true as well. There are a few things that you said, I was like, yeah, that's me. Guilty as Oh, awesome. So when it comes to the sign of Cancer, what planets are exalted there, or happiest, let's say?
What planets are exalted in Cancer? So Cancer is ruled by the moon. So obviously the moon is really happy in the
Yeah.
sign of Cancer.
Oh, sorry, I really wanted to ask about this because some people that I speak to are like, well, the moon's not necessarily strongest in Cancer; it's just more at home. And I was like, oh, okay. So is that true, or?
Well, the moon is at home in Cancer, so it is strong. Anytime you have a planet that's at home, it brings like excess of that energy. It strengthens the planet, but it's like too much of the same thing almost. So it can be problematic in that way. But it is actually considered to be a strong placement and a positive placement, especially traditionally. Other placements that are really good, Venus does really well in Cancer. It's not necessarily exalted there, but it actually does quite well in Cancer because it's this subjective, like caring, nurturing energy. So yeah, Venus is well in Cancer, and then you have the moon in Cancer, and then Jupiter, of course, does really well in Cancer. So Jupiter in Cancer is probably one of the best placements that you can have for Jupiter as well. So I mean, it just kind of depends on what you're looking at, but like a lot of the more feminine types of planetary energies tend to do really well in Cancer because it amplifies that energy. So yeah, so I mean, those would be the best placements for Cancer. Probably my least favorite placement. I mean, I know Saturn is not, Saturn is at its detriment in Cancer, so that's not like necessarily the best placement, but I actually find Mercury in Cancer to be really problematic because people are thinking with their emotions and that's where that like non-rational thinking becomes amplified. So all those issues with Cancer that I was just talking about, they tend to be exacerbated when you have Mercury in Cancer because Mercury is about the rational, logical, linear. And with Mercury in Cancer, you're not making any decisions rationally. Like you're usually always making decisions based on how you feel in that moment. Today I feel bad, so I'm saying no to that, even if it's a great opportunity because I feel icky. And, that might not serve you in the long term.
For sure. It's so interesting because obviously we've got the eclipse in Cancer happening at the moment. We have the Mercury retrograde, which has already started now in the sign of Cancer. So I think probably over the next 4 weeks, we're going to see a lot of that playing out, which will be interesting to see, I guess, on the wider world stage. Awesome. So another one, if you don't mind, I've only got 2 more. What planets are, and you mentioned Mercury doesn't do so well in Cancer, and it makes a lot of sense actually, because not everybody is good at thinking with their feelings or even differentiating them. So yeah, what other planets might be in detriment in Cancer?
Well, definitely Saturn. Saturn is about structure, rigidity. It's about being outside of your emotions and thinking about things more objectively. And so when you put Saturn in Cancer, there can be a lot of boundary issues, especially emotional boundaries. It can be very hard to put up the walls and defenses that you need. It can be very hard to structure your life in a way that is solid and firm and makes sense because Saturn rules your personal boundaries. And so people who have Saturn in Cancer, they tend to care a lot about other people and other people's problems. And so they tend to take on too much weight for other people's responsibilities and especially their emotional baggage to the point where it can be a detriment to that person. And they tend to have a hard time setting firm boundaries with people that they care about. If they feel empathic towards someone, if they feel, if it's like a family member or someone who they really care about, they can't draw that hard line in the sand like other people can. And so boundary issues become a thing with Saturn in Cancer, I would say. And they have a harder time structuring their lives in a way that's more objective and firm. Like, this is my boundary. This is what I need. And so I would say that would be a really difficult energy. Yeah. And so what else would be difficult? I mean, obviously Mars in Cancer, that's probably the worst one. Now that I'm thinking about it. So Mars in Cancer, it's really on or it's really off. It's kind of like if you want to take action, you have to be in the exact mood to do it. And then tomorrow you might not be in that mood, so you might not follow through with that action. It's also very passive aggressive when it comes to anger and the way that it expresses angry types of emotions and strong emotions. And so that can be a huge issue. The most passive aggressive people are Mars and Cancer. And they'll never admit that they're being passive aggressive. They'll never admit that they're angry. It's very like, are you a Mars and Cancer or are you just thinking about someone? Okay. I was gonna say, I don't want to offend you, but I've
No,
noticed
no, it's fine. If it was my stuff, I would totally put that.
want to offend any of the passive aggressive messages. Don't leave passive aggressive messages.
But yeah, it's great, and I love talking about this stuff because even if it's challenging, like I say this to anybody that watches my videos too, if you see something or you hear something, you think, oh crap, that's me. If it comes up like that, it's great because it gives you a chance to work with that energy and maybe change it, or even see how you're viewed from an outside perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's when something goes from being the unconscious into the conscious, you know, when you bring it. And that's the whole point with the high priestess. She's very much hidden and in the night, and you can see that by the background is sort of dark blue, whereas the chariot is very much out in the open, and that's why it's got the yellow background, because it's bringing sort of consciousness, so you're aware of what your strengths and your weaknesses are. So yeah, awesome. As I said, we love you Cancerian people, and Mars in Cancer if you have it.
Yeah, and you can totally, if you have your Mars in Cancer, it is that chariot energy in the sense, if your emotions are behind something, you are the most unstoppable force. But you have to continuously feel that way about the thing that you're doing. Otherwise, it's just going to fizzle out, or you're going to change course. And so that's where the challenge lies with the Mars in Cancer. So if you can keep that emotion going and tap into what got you started with the thing that you're doing, like that emotional state, that feeling, that sensation, then you can continue to charge forward. But if you lose sight of that, like you're going to be all over the place. And so you got to learn to channel that and to kind of bring yourself back into that state. Shift your emotions before you initiate anything. And make sure also you go through the entire range of the human emotional state before you make a decision to lock in and start something. That's a really good Mars in Cancer technique, to make sure that you're starting the right things. Because today it feels good because you're excited and you feel happy. Tomorrow it's going to feel bad. The next day it's going to feel then the next day you might feel happy about it again. But once you've gone through that whole emotional experience, if you're still committed to it, if you still want to initiate that action, then it's probably the right thing to do. But until you've done that, you might not know, because you might just feel happy today and you start it and it's like completely the wrong thing.
Yeah. Wow. Brilliant. So informative. Yeah, that's magic. Yeah. Brilliant. Awesome. And the last one, just to kind of play devil's advocate, because I get a lot of people ask sort of similar things to this. What's the difference between, aside from the obvious, what's the difference between Cancerian men and women?
Cancerian men and women. I would say it's a little bit harder for a man to be a Cancer just because of like societal norms and things like that, because they are kind of touchy-feely, right? And they're taught boys don't cry, boys don't act that way, don't, act on your emotions and all of that. So I think that for men, they can kind of put on that tough exterior a little bit more so. But when you get to know them in real life, like they have a lot of emotion. They're very sensitive, very moody, and it can be really challenging actually to be with a Cancer man. I have been in my past, and it's not a walk in the park, because everything you say might trigger them in some way, and they're used to bottling up their emotions, and that has to come out at some point. And so the people that are closest to them, the people that they trust, those are going to be the people on the receiving end of those emotional outbursts that they don't feel comfortable like emoting out in public or out in other scenarios. And so I think Cancer men would have a difficult time living out that experience, versus women, where we're already taught to be more receptive, more nurturing, to be seen and not heard, and to like take care of other people and all of these things, which are very Cancerian, right? It's a very traditionally feminine, like stereotypically feminine sign. And so I wouldn't say that they necessarily express themselves differently innately. It's more because of the way that society is structured and what we're told to be that causes the differentiation. So it's not necessarily that men who are Cancers are born and they're different automatically, or they express it differently. I think it's more like nature versus nurture type of situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Because obviously your external circumstances are always going to be, it's true. You could have a Cancerian man who was born to, people that were like totally cool with that, and, be who you are and feel what you feel and be open with it. And then you could have someone that had the opposite experience. And it's true. Like if you get that, you are going to respond differently.
And even if you get that nerd, like, yeah, you should be like that. When you go out into the world, that's not necessarily deemed acceptable, like by most standards. And so that still poses an issue. It's like, oh, my parents said that I can, you know, I can cry when I'm hurt and I can take care of my dollies. And then I go out to school and I get picked on for it. Right. So it's still a thing, regardless of the environment that you're brought up in.
Yeah, for sure. Brilliant. Wow. You've absolutely, I think that one is even more in depth than some of the others we've done, and we've gone pretty deep on all of them. That was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah,
There's
thank
so
you.
much that I can take away from that.
Yeah, and I'm definitely looking at the chariot differently now. So
Oh, one thing that we talked about as well, we touched on this just before we sign off, maybe, is this card is very fast. So
okay.
that whole quick energy of the crab,
Yeah.
very much this card, it tends to, and I mean, there's a debate as to whether the card influences the situation or, you know, all the rest of it. But when you see this, things can be speeding up. They can get really quick. It could be like when you have this as like an energy for the overall week,
Mm-hmm.
it's like you blink and the week is over and you're like, okay, where did that go? It's a really fast card. And that's the whole thing. Sometimes with a chariot, it's that really fast sort of bumpy ride. So you've got to be, you know, holding on to it. And like you said, focused and channeling all of your inner stuff.
Yeah, that's such like a focus, like a fast, bumpy ride. That's such a Cancer thing. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because Cancer is that cardinal energy. It's charging forward, but it is always a bumpy ride because you have to go through those emotional experiences. You have to navigate that, and sort of maybe sometimes go around the bumps a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a great video and I've learned a lot and I feel like we have gone really in depth with this one. So hopefully everyone out there enjoyed it. And if you like this video, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Raphael's channel, which I'll post a link down in the description below. And we'll see you guys next time.
Okay, thank you.